My name is Autumn, and I am 34 years old. Life has a way of serving up painful ironies when you least expect them. At our family reunion last summer, standing in front of everyone, my father looked me straight in the eyes and announced that he would rather eat garbage than ever speak to me again. The words cut through me like a knife, leaving me exposed and humiliated. What I never imagined was how quickly the tables would turn, or that within a month, the same man would be calling me, his voice breaking, begging for my help. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button to find out how one cruel rejection led to an unexpected second chance that neither of us saw coming. Growing up, my relationship with my dad was what most would call picture perfect. Jackson Kelly was my hero, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who cheered the loudest at my soccer games, and who stayed up all night helping me finish science projects. His eyes would light up with pride whenever I achieved something, no matter how small. We had inside jokes that nobody else understood, and weekend traditions that were sacred to us. Every Sunday morning, we would make pancakes together while dancing to old records in our pajamas. Mom would watch us with a smile, taking photos that now feel like artifacts from another lifetime. Everything changed when I turned 16. Mom was diagnosed with aggressive cancer, and within 6 months, she was gone. The day we buried her was the day I lost both parents in a way. Dad retreated into himself, buried in grief so profound that he became a shell of the man I knew. I tried everything to reach him, to be there for him, but it was as if he had built walls around his heart that I could not scale. "Dad, please talk to me," I would beg, standing outside his bedroom door. "We need each other now more than ever." But most nights the only response was silence, or sometimes the muffled sound of crying that tore at my teenage heart. 2 years after Mom died, Dad met Diane at a grief support group. Within 6 months, they were married in a small courthouse ceremony. I was not invited. I found out when I came home from school to find her things moved into our house. Dad introduced her as my new stepmother with an awkward formality that felt foreign between us. "Autumn, this is Diane. She is going to be living with us now. I expect you to treat her with respect." Diane was 15 years younger than Dad, with a permanent smile that never quite reached her eyes. From the beginning, there was something calculated about the way she inserted herself into our broken family. She would make elaborate meals and insist on family dinners where she dominated the conversation. She would talk over me whenever I tried to connect with Dad, subtly redirecting his attention back to herself. "Jackson, did I tell you about the wonderful investment opportunity my brother mentioned?" She would interject just as Dad was asking about my college applications. The most painful part was watching how Dad changed around her. He began to parrot her opinions, adopt her judgments, and worst of all, see me through her eyes. Subtle criticisms became routine. "Autumn, do you really think that career path is practical?" he would ask at Diane's prompting. "Maybe you should consider accounting like Diane suggests." By the time I left for college, the distance between us had grown into a chasm. I had earned a partial scholarship to State University, but needed help with the remaining tuition. When I approached Dad, he looked uncomfortable, glancing at Diane before responding. "We have some financial obligations right now that make that difficult," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Diane thinks it would be good for you to take out student loans, build character." I later discovered they had just purchased a vacation timeshare in Florida. Despite everything, I managed to put myself through college, working 2 part-time jobs while maintaining my grades. I graduated with honors and was accepted to law school, specializing in environmental law. Through those years, my communication with Dad dwindled to birthday cards and awkward phone calls on holidays, conversations filled with surface-level pleasantries and careful avoidance of anything meaningful. While building my career as an environmental attorney, I also built something more precious, a chosen family of friends who supported me unconditionally. Jessica became the sister I never had, the person who helped me move 5 times, who held me through breakups, and who knew exactly when to bring over ice cream and wine without being asked. "Your dad is missing out on knowing an amazing woman," she would tell me. "That is his loss, not yours." The invitation came from my Aunt Eleanor, Dad's sister, who had always tried to maintain connections within our fractured family. She called me one evening as I was preparing case notes for court. "Autumn, sweetie, I am organizing a family reunion at the lake house next month," she said, her voice warm but cautious. Everyone will be there, including your father. My stomach tightened. I do not know, Aunt Eleanor. Things between Dad and me are complicated. I know, honey, but he is not getting any younger. Neither am I, for that matter, she added with a small laugh. Sometimes we need to create opportunities for healing. Will you at least think about it? For weeks, I debated whether to attend. Jessica thought it might provide closure. My therapist suggested it could be a chance to set boundaries from a position of strength rather than hurt. In the end, what convinced me was a photo Aunt Eleanor texted, an old picture of Dad and me fishing when I was about 10, both of us laughing as I held up a tiny sunfish like it was a prized marlin. Remember when connections were simpler? Her text read. So with a mix of anxiety and cautious hope, I requested time off work, packed a suitcase, and drove 3 hours to the lake house that had once been the site of happy family gatherings in a different lifetime. The family lake house stood just as I remembered it, a sprawling cedar structure overlooking the water surrounded by pine trees that whispered in the summer breeze. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit for a moment before getting out of the car. You can do this, I whispered to myself. You are here as an adult, not a wounded child. The reunion was already in full swing. Cousins I had not seen in years were playing volleyball on the lawn. Aunts and uncles clustered around the massive grill on the deck. Children I had never met darted between groups of adults, their laughter carrying across the property. Aunt Eleanor spotted me first, rushing over with outstretched arms. Autumn, you made it! She wrapped me in a hug that smelled of sunscreen and her signature vanilla perfume. Everyone is going to be so happy to see you. Is he here? I asked quietly. Her smile faltered slightly. Yes, he and Diane arrived yesterday. They are down at the dock, I think. I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. Okay, I am going to say hello to everyone else first. The next hour was a blur of hugs, exclamations over how much I had grown up, and introductions to new family members who had joined through marriages and births in the years of my absence. My cousin Taylor, who had always been more like a sister when we were growing up, pulled me aside. I cannot believe you actually came, she said, linking her arm through mine. I have missed you so much. How are you really doing? I am doing well, I said and meant it. Made partner at the environmental law firm last year. I have good friends, a nice apartment. Life is good. And you are ready to see Uncle Jackson? She asked, her eyes concerned. As ready as I will ever be. We were interrupted by more relatives and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. But all the while I was conscious of scanning the crowd, both dreading and hoping to catch sight of my father. It was nearly 2 hours later when I finally saw him walking up from the dock with Diane. He had aged more than I expected. His hair had gone completely gray, and his posture was slightly stooped. But his laugh when someone called out to him was still the same rich sound I remembered from childhood. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. For a moment, I considered leaving, driving back to the safety of my apartment and the life I had built without him. But Taylor squeezed my hand. You have got this, she whispered. Whatever happens, we are all here. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward my father. He saw me when I was about 10 feet away, his conversation with my uncle trailing off mid-sentence. Something flickered across his face, an emotion I could not quite identify, before Diane touched his arm possessively. Hello, Dad, I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. Autumn. His voice was neutral, revealing nothing. You look well. Thank you, so do you. We stood in uncomfortable silence until Diane spoke. Jackson Nancy wants to show us the new boat they purchased. We should not keep her waiting. She barely acknowledged me with a tight smile before leading him away. Throughout the afternoon, I made several more attempts to speak with him. Each time he found a reason to walk away, or Diane created a diversion. It became obvious that he was actively avoiding any private conversation with me. He just needs time, Aunt Eleanor assured me. Having you both here is the first step. By evening, the entire extended family gathered for a formal dinner in the lake house's massive dining room. The long table was beautifully set with candles and wildflower centerpieces. Name cards had been placed at each setting, and I discovered that Aunt Eleanor had seated me across from my father with several people between us on either side, perhaps hoping the buffer would make interaction less strained. The meal progressed through multiple courses, wine flowing freely, as conversation grew louder and more animated. I participated in discussions around me, sharing stories about interesting environmental cases, carefully crafting an image of success and contentment. Occasionally, I glanced toward my father, sometimes catching him watching me before he quickly looked away. After dessert was served, Aunt Eleanor stood and tapped her glass for attention. The room gradually quieted. "I want to thank everyone for coming together today," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "Family is the most precious thing we have in this world. We may not always agree, we may sometimes hurt each other, but the bonds of blood can never truly be broken." She raised her glass. "To family, to healing old wounds, and to making new memories together." Everyone raised their glasses, murmuring in agreement. In that moment of warmth and connection, I felt a surge of courage. When people began to chat again, I stood and walked around the table to where my father sat. "Dad," I said quietly, "could we talk for a few minutes? Maybe take a walk down to the lake?" The conversation around us gradually died as people noticed the confrontation they had been anticipating all day. My father looked up at me, then at Diane, whose mouth had tightened into a thin line. "Dad, please." I continued, my voice soft but clear in the now quiet room. "It has been years. I just want to talk." What happened next will forever be burned into my memory. My father pushed back from the table and stood facing me, his expression hardened, eyes cold in a way I had never seen before. "Autumn," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I would rather eat garbage than talk to you again." The collective gasp was audible. Someone dropped a fork, the clatter unnaturally loud in the stunned silence that followed. I stood there, feeling the blood drain from my face, aware of every pair of eyes witnessing my humiliation. "Jackson," Aunt Eleanor exclaimed, horrified. But my father had already turned away, taking Diane's arm. "We are leaving early," he announced, to no one in particular. "Thank you for the dinner." I remained rooted to the spot as they walked out, the sound of the front door closing like a final punctuation to my public rejection. When I could finally move again, I managed to walk with my head held high through the dining room, past the pitying glances and uncomfortable expressions. "Autumn, wait!" Several voices called after me, but I needed to escape to process what had just happened, away from the witnesses to my humiliation. I grabbed my purse and keys and walked quickly to my car, tears blurring my vision, but refusing to fall until I was safely alone. The drive home from the lake house was a blur. I made it about 20 minutes down the highway before I had to pull over, unable to see through my tears. Parked at a deserted rest stop, I finally allowed myself to fall apart, sobbing, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. "I would rather eat garbage than talk to you again." The words played on repeat in my mind, each iteration sending fresh waves of pain through my chest. What had I done to deserve such cruelty? What could possibly justify not just rejection, but public humiliation, deliberately designed to wound as deeply as possible? When the tears finally subsided, I sat watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed mockingly beautiful against my internal landscape of devastation. My phone had been buzzing continuously in my purse. I finally checked it to find multiple missed calls and text messages from family members, particularly Taylor and Aunt Eleanor. "Are you okay? Where are you?" Taylor had texted 3 times. "I am so sorry, Autumn. Please call me when you can." This from Aunt Eleanor. I texted Taylor briefly to let her know I was safe and driving home, then turned my phone off. I needed space to process what had happened without well-meaning attempts at comfort. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had settled into my bones. I collapsed onto my couch, still wearing my clothes from the reunion, too emotionally drained to even change. Sleep eventually claimed me, mercifully blank and dreamless. Morning brought the chirping of my alarm for work, a jarring reminder that the world continued regardless of personal devastation. I called in sick for the first time in 2 years, unable to face colleagues or clients in my current state. When I finally turned my phone back on, there were even more messages waiting. I scrolled through them listlessly until Taylor's most recent text caught my eye. "Everyone is furious with Uncle Jackson. What he did was unforgivable. Several people left right after you did, including Grandma Catherine. She told him she was ashamed he was her son." A small wounded part of me took comfort in knowing the family had not condoned his behavior. Still, it did little to heal the raw, gaping wound his words had left. Around noon, my doorbell rang. It was Jessica, holding bags of takeout food and wearing an expression of fierce protectiveness. "Taylor called me," she explained, pushing past me into the apartment. "She was worried when you stopped responding to texts. I figured you might need reinforcements." I had not realized how hungry I was until the aroma of pad thai and spring rolls filled my apartment. As we ate, I recounted every painful detail of the reunion. Jessica listened without interrupting her expression, cycling through shock, outrage, and profound sympathy. "Autumn," she said when I had finished. "What he did was emotional abuse, plain and simple. You did not deserve any of that." "I keep wondering what I did wrong," I admitted, my voice small. "What made him hate me so much?" "This is not about you," Jessica said firmly. "This is about him and whatever twisted narrative Diane has helped him construct to justify abandoning his daughter. You were a child who lost her mother and needed her father. He was the adult who failed you, not the other way around." Over the next few days, I moved through life mechanically. I returned to work, throwing myself into cases with an intensity that concerned my colleagues. At night, I alternated between numbness and waves of grief that felt fresh, as if I were mourning my father for the first time, despite years of estrangement. A week after the reunion, I had my regular session with Dr. Harris, my therapist of 3 years. The office was a sanctuary of calm, with its soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and the gentle sound of a water feature in the corner. "How are you holding up?" she asked after I had recounted the reunion disaster. "I feel like I should be handling this better," I admitted. "I have been estranged from my father for years. Why does this hurt so much when it is just more of the same rejection?" Dr. Harris leaned forward slightly. "Because you still had hope, Autumn. Despite everything, part of you hoped that seeing you might reawaken his love for you. That hope was the last tether connecting you to the father you once knew. And now I know it is truly over," I finished for her. "There is no relationship to salvage." "How does that make you feel?" she asked gently. I considered the question carefully. Sad, angry, but also relieved in a strange way, like I can stop waiting for something that is never going to happen. "That is an important realization," Dr. Harris noted. "Sometimes acceptance, even of painful truths, can be the first step toward healing." During that session, we talked about boundaries, about grief, and about moving forward. I made the decision there in that peaceful office to formally cut ties with my father. No more birthday cards, no more holiday calls, no more leaving the door open for reconciliation. "I cannot control his actions or feelings," I said, finding strength in the words as I spoke them. "But I can control how much access he has to my life and my heart." In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my sense of self outside the shadow of parental rejection. I reconnected with friends I had been neglecting while preparing for the reunion. I joined a weekend hiking group that explored local trails. I volunteered at an environmental cleanup project that had been seeking legal advisors. Work became not just a distraction, but a source of genuine fulfillment. I threw myself into a class action lawsuit representing families whose water had been contaminated by corporate negligence. Each small victory for these families felt like a personal triumph, a reminder that I could make positive impacts despite my own pain. Slowly, the sharp edges of hurt began to dull. Not disappear, but become manageable. I still had moments when a random memory of my father from happier times would ambush me, leaving me breathless with grief for what had been lost. But those moments became less frequent, less debilitating. "You are building resilience," Dr. Harris told me during one session. "Not because you do not feel pain, but because you have learned to carry it while still moving forward." I was beginning to believe that I might actually heal from this lifelong wound when fate decided to throw an unexpected curveball into my carefully reconstructed life. Exactly 1 month after the disastrous family reunion, my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I know this because I stared blearily at the glowing numbers on my bedside clock before fumbling for my cell phone. The screen showed an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but years as an attorney had conditioned me to answer possible emergency calls. Hello. My voice was thick with sleep. There was a pause, then, Autumn. The voice was barely recognizable, raspy and weak, but unmistakably my father's. I sat bolt upright in bed, instantly awake, heart pounding. Dad? I could not keep the shock from my voice. I need help. His words were strained, as if each one cost him tremendous effort. I am at Memorial Hospital. The doctors say I need someone to... He broke off, coughing painfully. Dad, what is happening? Are you okay? Despite everything, concern flooded through me. Kidney failure. The words were blunt. They want to release me, but I cannot go home. Diane is gone. She left. I have nowhere to go. My mind reeled, trying to process this information. What do you mean Diane left? Where would she go? Took everything. Bank accounts, houses in foreclosure. Each sentence was clipped as if he was conserving energy. She had been moving money for months, planning it. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Just a month ago, this man had publicly humiliated me, declared he would rather eat garbage than speak to me. Now he was calling from a hospital bed, apparently abandoned and destitute. Why are you calling me? I finally asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The line was silent for so long I thought he might have hung up. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. You are the only one left who might help me. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. I thought about hanging up, about telling him exactly where he could go. The words were right there, bitter and justified on my tongue. Instead, I found myself asking, which hospital? What room number? After getting the information, I ended the call without committing to anything. I sat in my dark bedroom, phone clutched in my hand, thoughts racing. Part of me, the wounded part, screamed that this was justice, karma, the universe delivering retribution for his cruelty. Another part, one I barely recognized, whispered that this was a human being in crisis, regardless of our history. Unable to make a decision alone, I called Jessica despite the hour. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice groggy but immediately concerned when she realized who was calling. Autumn, what is wrong? Are you okay? I explained my father's call as concisely as possible. I do not know what to do, Jess. After everything he said, everything he did, should I actually help him? Jessica was quiet for a moment. What do you feel is right? Not what he deserves, but what feels right to you. That is just it. I do not know, I admitted. Part of me thinks this is exactly what he deserves. Part of me cannot imagine leaving anyone in that situation, even him. Then maybe the question is, which decision would you be able to live with long term? Jessica asked gently. If you help him, you might get hurt again. If you do not help him, would you regret it? Her question cut through the emotional chaos in my mind, providing clarity I desperately needed. The truth was, regardless of what he deserved, I knew what kind of person I wanted to be. And that person did not abandon family in medical crisis, even family who had abandoned me. I think I need to at least go see him, I said finally. Assess the situation. Want me to come with you? No, but thank you. This is something I need to do alone. After hanging up, I dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, grabbed my purse, and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. The streets were nearly empty as I drove to Memorial Hospital, giving me too much space to think, to doubt, to rehearse what I might say when face to face with my father again. The hospital was quiet when I arrived, the fluorescent lights harsh against the lingering night outside. I followed signs to the elevator up to the fourth-floor nephrology unit and down a long corridor to room 416. Outside the door, I paused, gathering courage before knocking softly and pushing the door open. The sight that greeted me was shocking. My father, always a robust, strong man in my memories, lay connected to machines, his face gaunt, his body seemingly shrunken beneath the thin hospital blanket. His skin had a grayish pallor that frightened me more than I wanted to admit. For a moment, he did not notice me. His eyes closed, as if even keeping them open required too much effort. Dad, I said softly. His eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on me. Something crossed his face, an emotion too complex to name, before he attempted to sit up straighter. You came, he said, his voice slightly stronger than it had been on the phone, but still alarmingly weak. I came to understand the situation. I clarified, not wanting him to assume anything. I remained standing near the door, maintaining physical distance that mirrored my emotional guardedness. What exactly happened? Over the next 30 minutes, my father explained his situation in halting sentences. His kidneys were failing, a condition that had been developing for some time, but had suddenly worsened. He needed ongoing dialysis and careful management of his diet and medications. Diane, upon learning of his diagnosis, had apparently accelerated her secret plans. She had been systematically transferring their assets to accounts in her name alone for months. When the doctors said I would need long-term care, expensive medications, she was just gone the next day. Left a note saying she had not signed up to be a nurse. His voice was hollow as he recounted this. By the time I realized what had happened, she had cleaned out our joint accounts, sold our stocks, even took items from the house. Why did you not call the police? That is theft, I pointed out. He looked away. Most everything was in joint names. She had legal access. And the few things that were not. He trailed off, seeming embarrassed. You did not want people to know she had left you. I guessed, understanding his pride even as I found it frustrating. He gave a slight nod. I tried staying at a motel, but the money ran out. Then this last episode happened, and the doctors say I cannot be alone right now. I need a stable place for recovery and someone to help monitor the dialysis process until I get stronger. The unspoken request hung in the air between us. I studied my father, this stranger who shared my blood, trying to reconcile the man before me with both the loving father of my childhood and the cruel man from the reunion. Why did you say it? I asked suddenly, the question bursting from me unbidden. At the reunion, why would you say something so deliberately hurtful? He closed his eyes briefly, his face contracting with what might have been shame. I cannot talk about that right now. I am too tired. Well, I cannot make any decisions without understanding what happened, I replied firmly. You cannot expect me to help you while that hangs between us. A nurse entered, then checking his vitals and informing us that the doctor would be around soon to discuss discharge options. When she left, we sat in uncomfortable silence, the beeping of machines filling the void where conversation should have been. Finally, I stood. I need some time to think. I will come back this afternoon after I have had a chance to process this and speak with the doctor. As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. Autumn, thank you for coming. I do not deserve it. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of his behavior that I had heard. Not an apology, not an explanation, but at least a recognition that he understood the magnitude of what he was asking. I left without responding, my thoughts in turmoil. Walking to my car in the now sunny parking lot, I called my office to request emergency personal leave, then sat behind the wheel considering my options. Taking my father into my home would be difficult logistically, emotionally, and practically. I lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment, so space was not the issue. But I worked long hours, and his care sounded intensive. More concerning was the emotional toll of having daily contact with someone who had hurt me so deeply and had yet to even apologize properly. Yet the alternative, leaving him to whatever fate awaited those without resources or support, felt impossible. Regardless of our past, I could not abandon a sick, vulnerable person to potential homelessness or inadequate care. By the time I returned to the hospital that afternoon, I had made my decision, setting clear boundaries in my mind. I would help him with a place to stay and basic support during his recovery. But this was not reconciliation or forgiveness. This was basic human decency, nothing more. The doctor confirmed everything my father had said about his condition. With proper care, nutrition, and regular dialysis, he could stabilize and potentially recover significant function. Without it, his prognosis was poor. He will need a caregiver for at least the next few weeks, the doctor explained. Someone to ensure he takes medications correctly, follows dietary restrictions, and gets to dialysis appointments 3 times weekly. Are you able to provide that level of support? I took a deep breath. Yes, I can arrange to work from home part-time and hire additional help if needed. When I returned to my father's room and informed him of my decision, relief washed over his face quickly, followed by something that looked almost like shame. Thank you, he said quietly. I will try not to be a burden. I need to be very clear. I responded, my voice steady. I am doing this because it is the right thing to do, not because I have forgotten or forgiven what happened. We will need to establish ground rules and expectations. This is a temporary arrangement focused on your health, not a reconciliation. He nodded slowly. I understand. 3 days later, with discharge instructions, prescriptions, and a folder of dietary guidelines, I helped my father walking with a cane and moving painfully slowly into my guest bedroom. As I settled him with necessary items within reach, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward an unexpected healing neither of us had anticipated. Setting up the spare room in my apartment for my father felt surreal. I placed a small table beside the bed for his medications, hung a whiteboard on the wall to track his dialysis appointments, and arranged the room to accommodate his limited mobility. The space transformed from my rarely used guest room into a convalescent area, complete with the subtle scent of antiseptic that seemed to have followed him from the hospital. The first few days passed in awkward, strained silence. We moved around each other cautiously like wary animals sharing territory unexpectedly. I would prepare his meals according to the strict renal diet guidelines, leave them on the kitchen table with his medications, then retreat to my home office to work. He would emerge from his room when he heard me return to mine, our careful choreography designed to minimize interaction. At night, I sometimes heard him coughing or moving restlessly. Once I passed his partially open door and glimpsed him sitting on the edge of the bed, head in hands, shoulders shaking silently. I hesitated, then continued to my room, uncertain whether comfort would be welcomed from the daughter he had so recently rejected. The routine of care established itself gradually. 3 days a week, I would drive him to the dialysis center, wait during the 4-hour procedure, then bring him home exhausted. I rearranged my work schedule, taking early morning video calls before he woke and completing briefs late at night after he had gone to bed. It was during the third dialysis session that necessity finally broke our silence. The nurse needed information about his medical history that he was too tired to communicate clearly. "Does kidney disease run in your family?" she asked, looking between us. I realized with a start that I had no idea. The gap in my knowledge about my own medical history struck me suddenly as both absurd and dangerous. "Dad," I prompted when he did not immediately answer. "Your grandfather had it," he said weakly. "My father. He died from complications when I was in my 20s. This was information I had never known, a piece of family history and personal risk factor that had been lost in our years of estrangement. After the session, as we drove home in silence, I found myself contemplating how much else I did not know, how many other important details had fallen into the void between us. Back at the apartment, as I helped him settle into the recliner I had purchased for his comfort during recovery, I decided to address the practical aspects of our situation directly. "We need to talk about your longer-term plans," I said, sitting across from him. "The doctor mentioned you will likely need dialysis indefinitely. What arrangements were you making before things changed with Diane?" He looked away, embarrassment evident in his posture. "There was a treatment plan, consultations with specialists. Diane handled most of the administrative details. I was still processing the diagnosis." "And your financial situation? The house is in foreclosure, you said?" He nodded, his expression pained. 3 months behind on payments. I discovered she had been redirecting my pension deposits to an account I did not know about. By the time I realized, she had taken almost everything. "Did you file a police report?" "Speak to a lawyer?" I asked, professional instincts kicking in. "No." He sighed heavily. "What would be the point? Most of what she took she had legal access to through joint accounts. The rest, proving it would be difficult. And I do not have resources for legal battles now." I frowned, making mental notes. "We should at least document everything. If you decide to pursue action later, you will need records." For the first time since he had arrived, my father looked at me directly, really seeing me. "You sound like a lawyer." "I am a lawyer," I reminded him. "Environmental law, but the principles are the same." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You always were determined, even as a little girl. Remember how you wanted to save the frogs in the pond behind our house?" The unexpected reference to a shared memory from happier times caught me off guard. I had been 7 or 8, horrified to discover that development near our home was threatening a small pond where frogs spawned each spring. I had created petitions going door to door in the neighborhood gathering signatures. "You helped me deliver the petition to the town council," I said, the memory suddenly vivid. "You told me that day that standing up for what is right matters even when it is difficult." His eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "I remember. You were so passionate, so brave, standing up in front of all those adults." The fragile moment of connection hung between us, tenuous but real. I was not ready to fully embrace it, but neither did I want to sever it completely. "We need to address your immediate situation," I said, returning to practical matters. "I can help with housing temporarily, but we need to establish a sustainable plan." Over the next hour, we had our first real conversation since his arrival. He explained that his pension should resume coming to him directly once he completed the necessary paperwork. It would not be enough to reclaim his house, but could cover basic needs and contribute toward rent in a modest apartment once he was stable enough. "I will need to find something small, affordable," he said. "Everything Diane and I had built over the years is gone." As he spoke, I began to understand the full scope of his situation. He had not just lost his health and his wife, but his home, his savings, his dignity. The proud, sometimes stubborn man who had raised me was now humbled by circumstances beyond his control. It did not excuse his cruelty at the reunion, but it helped explain the desperation that had driven him to call me that night. Later that week, while my father was resting, I received a call from Aunt Eleanor. "Autumn Taylor told me Jackson is staying with you," she said, concern evident in her voice. "How are you handling that?" I stepped onto my small balcony to speak privately. "It is complicated. He needed help and I could not turn him away." "After what he said to you, honey, no one would have blamed you if you had." "I would have blamed me," I said simply. "You always had the biggest heart." She sighed. "Listen, there is something you should know. We have all been talking the family. Jackson has been making terrible decisions since he got involved with Diane. She isolated him from everyone who cared about him, not just you." Aunt Eleanor went on to explain that over the years my father had gradually cut ties with most of the family, always with excuses that seemed to originate from Diane. Family gatherings he missed, calls he did not return, relationships that withered from neglect. "The reunion was my last attempt to break through whatever hold she had on him," Aunt Eleanor admitted. "I never imagined he would behave so cruelly." This new perspective did not heal the wound of my father's words, but it provided context I had been missing. My father's rejection had not been solely about me, but part of a larger pattern of isolation and control. That evening, when I brought my father his dinner, I decided to address what had happened at the reunion directly. We could not continue living together, however temporarily, with that unspoken hurt between us. "We need to talk about what you said to me at the family reunion," I said, sitting across from him as he picked at his low-sodium meal. He set down his fork, his expression guarded. "I know. I would rather eat garbage than talk to you again." I quoted the words still painful to say aloud. "Why would you say something so deliberately cruel in front of everyone?" My father looked down at his hands, now thin and spotted with age, a tremor visible in the fingers that had once felt so strong when they held mine crossing streets or teaching me to ride a bike. "Diane had been telling me for weeks not to attend the reunion," he began slowly. "When Eleanor insisted, Diane finally agreed we would go, but she spent the entire drive there talking about how you would try to humiliate me, how you had always been jealous of her relationship with me." He paused, seeming to gather strength before continuing. "When you approached me at dinner, she squeezed my arm hard and whispered, 'Remember what we discussed. She is trying to manipulate you in front of everyone.' And I panicked. I said the worst thing I could think of to prove to Diane that I was on her side. 'So you publicly humiliated your daughter to appease your wife?'" The hurt and anger in my voice was unmistakable. "Yes." His admission was blunt, without excuses. "It was unforgivable. I have had a lot of time to think since Diane left about the kind of man I have become. I do not recognize myself anymore." "That makes two of us," I said quietly. He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time in this difficult conversation. After your mother died, I was lost. Diane seemed to offer a way back to feeling something other than grief. But the price was everything else in my life, including you. I was too blind to see it until it was too late. It was not a full apology, but it was an honest acknowledgement, more than I had expected. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of years of estrangement and hurt between us, but also the first fragile tendril of understanding. I cannot promise forgiveness, I finally said, but I can promise to try to understand. He nodded, accepting this limited offering. That is more than I deserve. Over the following days, small changes appeared in our interactions. The careful avoidance gave way to brief conversations. He began to eat breakfast at the kitchen table while I prepared for work. I started to linger after dropping him at dialysis, waiting in the room rather than the car, sometimes reading case files, sometimes just watching the steady process that was keeping him alive. One morning, about 2 weeks after he had moved in, I was sorting through mail when I discovered a letter from his mortgage company. Opening it with his permission, I found it was worse than he had thought, the foreclosure proceeding rapidly. I need to go to the house, he said after reading the letter. There are still things there, personal items, photos, things that matter. Are you strong enough? I asked, concerned. I need to do this while I still can, he insisted. That weekend, I drove him to the house where he and Diane had lived for the past decade, a place I had visited only a handful of times, always feeling like an unwelcome guest. It was a large suburban home with manicured landscaping, everything about it meticulously maintained, at least from the outside. Inside was a different story. It was immediately clear that Diane had taken anything of obvious value. Empty spaces on walls where artwork had hung outlines of dust, where electronics had stood cabinet doors ajar, revealing partially empty shelves. My father moved slowly through the rooms, his face a mask of contained emotion. She even took your mother's silver, he noted quietly, opening a dining room drawer to reveal empty velvet slots in a wooden chest. In what had been his office, he directed me to a hidden panel behind a bookshelf revealing a small safe. She never knew about this, he said, entering a combination. Inside were a few documents, a modest amount of cash, and a small velvet box. He handed the box to me. This was meant for you eventually. I should have given it to you years ago. Inside was my mother's engagement ring, a simple diamond in a vintage setting that I remembered from my childhood. Seeing it brought an unexpected flood of tears. She wanted you to have it, my father said, his voice rough with emotion. For your wedding someday, or just because it was part of her. I held on to it, telling myself I was waiting for the right time. The truth is, giving it to you meant accepting she was really gone. We spent hours at the house carefully collecting truly important items, family photos Diane had deemed worthless mementos from my childhood that my father had preserved, despite our estrangement documents needed to rebuild his life. As we worked, he pointed out things that had belonged to my mother, sharing stories I had never heard or had forgotten. This was from our first anniversary, he said, holding a small ceramic bluebird. We were so poor then, but she saw this in a shop window and fell in love with it. I saved for weeks to buy it for her. By the time we loaded the last box into my car, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a recognition of shared history of the family we had once been and might in some new form become again. That night, as I helped him organize the rescued items in his room, he picked up a photo album and opened it to a page showing me at about 5 years old, sitting on his shoulders at a county fair. I was so proud to be your father, he said softly. I still am. I just lost my way for a very long time. I did not respond directly, not ready to offer the absolution he sought. But I did sit beside him on the edge of the bed, looking through photos together, reconstructing pieces of a shared past that might help us navigate an uncertain future. A month into my father's stay, what had begun as an emergency arrangement had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. The careful distance we had maintained gradually diminished as daily interactions forced a new kind of relationship to form. Not the easy closeness of my childhood, but not the cold estrangement of recent years either. Something tentative, cautious, but increasingly real. My father's health improved incrementally. The color returned to his face and he gained back some of the weight he had lost. He began to take short walks around the apartment complex, his dependence on the cane lessening. The dialysis continued 3 times weekly, a grueling but necessary process that he endured with stoic determination. One evening, as we shared a rare meal together at the kitchen table, he looked at me with an expression I could not quite interpret. "There is something I need to tell you," he said, setting down his fork. "Something I should have told you long ago." I waited, uncertain what confession might be coming. "After your mother died, I was not just sad, I was angry," he began. Angry at the world, at God, at the doctors who could not save her. But most of all, I was angry at myself. "Why?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. My father had been devoted to my mother throughout her illness, rarely leaving her side. "Because I missed the early signs," he said, his voice tight with old guilt. She had been complaining of fatigue, some pain for months before the diagnosis. I told her it was just stress, that she was working too hard. I did not insist she see a doctor until... He stopped, swallowing hard. By then, it was already stage 4. The oncologist said earlier intervention might have made a difference. I sat back, processing this revelation. "You blamed yourself for Mom's death." He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "And then there was you, looking so much like her, needing me to be strong when I was falling apart. Every time I looked at you, I saw her and I remembered my failure. It was easier to pull away than face that every day. So you shut me out because I reminded you of her." The hurt was evident in my voice, though I tried to control it. At first, yes. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed time, but then Diane came along and she made it easier to keep that distance. She never said it directly, but she encouraged the separation. Suggested you were better off independent, that you resented my grief, that you blamed me too. "I never blamed you," I said firmly. "I was 16, Dad. I lost my mother, and then in many ways I lost my father too. All I wanted was for us to help each other through it." His eyes filled with tears. "I know that now. I think I knew it then, but I was too lost in my own pain to be the father you deserved." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of his confession hanging between us. "When did you realize what Diane was doing?" I finally asked. "Isolating you from everyone." He sighed deeply. "There were moments over the years when I questioned things, when she always had a reason why we could not attend family gatherings, or why your visits needed to be brief. But I chose not to see the pattern. It was easier to go along to avoid conflict." "And your finances. When did you realize she was taking everything?" "Too late," he admitted. "She handled all our accounts, said it stressed me out that she was better with money. I trusted her completely. It was only when I got the diagnosis and started asking questions about insurance, medical costs, that I noticed discrepancies. When I confronted her, she denied everything. Then a few days later, she was just gone. Left a note saying she had not signed up to care for an invalid." The cruelty of the abandonment struck me anew. Whatever my issues with my father, the callousness of leaving a seriously ill spouse was shocking. "Have you heard from her since?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I hired a private investigator with the last of my accessible funds. He traced her to Arizona. Apparently, she has moved in with a wealthy widower there." "Her next target," I said grimly. "Most likely." My father looked defeated. "I feel sorry for him." As our conversation continued into the evening, other truths emerged. My father revealed how isolated he had become in recent years, how his world had narrowed to just himself and Diane. He admitted to ignoring warning signs, to compromising his values and relationships to maintain peace in his marriage. "I think I knew on some level that I had made a terrible mistake," he said. "But admitting it meant facing how much damage I had done, how many years I had wasted, how badly I had failed you." "And now?" I asked quietly. He met my eyes directly. "Now I have lost everything except the chance to tell my daughter the truth. I do not expect forgiveness, Autumn. I just want you to know that I see clearly now, and I understand what I threw away." That night, lying in bed, I thought about the years of hurt and rejection, the cruel words at the reunion balanced against the broken man now staying in my guest room. The father I had longed for throughout my adolescence and early adulthood was gone, replaced by someone both familiar and strange, a man humbled by loss and illness. I could not yet find forgiveness in my heart, but I could feel the first tentative stirrings of compassion. Not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger and hurt was its own kind of prison, one I had lived in for too long. The following weekend, Taylor came to visit, curious about the strange living arrangement I had established with my father. After he had retreated to his room to rest, she and I sat on my small balcony, glasses of wine in hand. "I cannot believe you are doing this," she said, shaking her head in wonder. "After what he said at the reunion, most people would have slammed the door in his face." "Sometimes I still want to," I admitted. "But then I see how vulnerable he is now, how all his defenses have been stripped away, and I just see a person. Someone who made terrible choices and is living with the consequences." "Has he apologized? Properly, I mean?" I considered the question. "Not in those exact words. But he has acknowledged what he did, the choices he made. He is not making excuses anymore." Taylor studied me over the rim of her glass. "And is that enough for you?" "I do not know yet," I answered honestly. "I am taking it one day at a time." As Taylor was leaving, my father emerged briefly to say goodbye. There was an awkward moment when she clearly did not know how to interact with him after witnessing his cruelty at the reunion. To my surprise, he addressed it directly. "I owe you an apology too, Taylor," he said quietly. "What I did at the reunion affected everyone there. I am sorry you had to witness that." Taylor's expression softened slightly. "It is Autumn you hurt the most." "Yes," he agreed. "And that is something I will regret for the rest of my life." After she left, I found myself looking at my father with new eyes, seeing not just the man who had hurt me so deeply, but someone struggling to find a path to redemption, however late and difficult that path might be. The next major revelation came unexpectedly during a routine medical follow-up. The nephrologist was reviewing my father's case, discussing treatment options and prognosis. "With your family history, we need to be particularly vigilant," the doctor commented. "Your father died of complications from the same condition, correct?" My father nodded, then glanced at me. "My daughter should probably be screened too, given the hereditary factors." It was the first time he had openly acknowledged concern for my well-being in years. The simple statement contained volumes, a recognition of our connection beyond the current crisis, a looking forward to a future he might not be part of, but wanted to protect me for anyway. In the car afterward, I brought up something that had been bothering me. "Why did you never tell me about Grandpa's kidney disease? That is pretty significant medical history." He was quiet for a moment. "After your mother died and we grew apart, there were so many conversations we never had. Important things that parents should tell their children. I failed you in that too." "Are there other health issues in your family I should know about?" I asked, suddenly aware of the gaps in my knowledge. This led to an hour-long conversation at home with my father, filling me in on my family medical history, stories about relatives I barely remembered or never met, the genetic legacy I carried without knowing it. It was information I needed practically, but it also connected me to a larger family narrative I had been missing. As the weeks passed, we fell into new patterns. My father began to take on small tasks around the apartment as his strength returned, washing dishes or folding laundry. I found myself less rigid about maintaining separation, sometimes joining him to watch documentaries he enjoyed, or sharing takeout on evenings when cooking felt like too much effort. We were not a normal family, not yet, and perhaps never again in the way we once had been. But we were two people finding a way to coexist with a complicated past, possibly building something new from the ruins of what had been destroyed. I told Dr. Harris during a therapy session, that I am starting to see him as a whole person, not just my father who failed me, but someone with his own struggles, weaknesses, and capacity for change." "That is significant progress," she noted, "for both of you." One evening, nearly 3 months after my father had moved in, we reached another turning point. He had been on the phone with Aunt Eleanor, and I overheard him say something that stopped me in my tracks. "I need to make amends properly," he was saying. "Not just to Autumn, but to everyone. Would you be willing to help me arrange something?" When he emerged from his room, I was sitting on the couch pretending to read a book while processing what I had overheard. "Autumn," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "I want to host a dinner. For the family. Here, if you would permit it. There are things I need to say to everyone together." I looked at him in surprise. "You want to have the family here in my apartment?" He nodded. "I know it is a lot to ask, but I think it is time. For all of us." I considered what this meant, the symbolic weight of bringing family into this space that had become a kind of neutral territory for our tentative rebuilding. "Okay," I said finally. "Let us do it." 2 weeks later, my small apartment hosted an impromptu family gathering. Aunt Eleanor came with her husband. Taylor and her brother Michael arrived with dishes to share. 2 other cousins I had reconnected with since the reunion disaster joined us. It was not the entire extended family, but it was a start, a core group who had been most affected by the tensions and estrangements of recent years. My father had insisted on contributing to the meal preparation, despite his limited energy making his signature garlic bread that had once been a staple at family gatherings in happier times. The familiar scent filling my apartment created an unexpected wave of nostalgia, a sensory reminder of the father he had once been. When everyone had eaten and conversation was flowing more easily than I had dared hope, my father gently tapped his water glass for attention. The room quieted, an undercurrent of tension suddenly present, as everyone remembered the last time our family had gathered for a meal. "Thank you all for coming." My father began, his voice steady but humble. "I know that after what happened at the reunion, many of you might have preferred not to be in the same room with me again. I would not have blamed you." He paused, looking around at each face before continuing. "The things I said that day, particularly to my daughter, were unforgivable. I cannot take them back, but I can acknowledge openly in front of the same family who witnessed my cruelty that I was wrong, deeply, terribly wrong." Aunt Eleanor reached over to squeeze his hand encouragingly. "Many of you know that shortly after the reunion my health failed and my circumstances changed dramatically," he continued. "What you may not know is that when I had nowhere else to turn, Autumn took me in. Despite everything I had done, every hurt I had caused, she showed me a compassion I had not earned and did not deserve." At this point, he turned to face me directly, his eyes filled with emotion. "I do not have the right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you all to know that I see clearly now the damage I have done, the years wasted, the relationships damaged, and I am profoundly, deeply sorry." The silence that followed was heavy with collective emotion. Then Taylor, always the most outspoken of the cousins, raised her glass. "To second chances," she said simply, and to Autumn, who had the courage to offer one. As glasses were raised around the room, I felt something shift inside me, a loosening of the tight knot of hurt I had carried for so long. Not gone entirely, perhaps never completely healed, but transformed into something I could carry more lightly. Later, as family members were leaving, each took a moment to speak privately with my father, brief conversations that seemed to hold significance for both parties. Aunt Eleanor hugged him tightly, whispering something that made him nod with tears in his eyes. When everyone had gone and we were cleaning up together in comfortable silence, my father finally spoke the words he had been approaching for months. "Autumn," he said, setting down the dish towel and turning to face me fully. "I am so sorry. For everything. For the reunion, yes, but for all the years before that too. For not being the father you needed after your mother died. For allowing Diane to come between us. For missing so much of your life." The simple, straightforward apology without qualifications or excuses was what I had needed to hear for so long. I did not respond immediately, letting the words and their sincerity settle around us. "Thank you," I said finally, "for saying it plainly." "I know it does not fix anything," he acknowledged, "but I needed to say it directly just between us." That night, lying in bed, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. From the cruel public rejection that had seemed to finalize our estrangement to this tentative new beginning built on vulnerability and truth. Neither of us could reclaim the lost years or erase the hurts inflicted. But perhaps we could build something new, something honest that acknowledged both the pain and the possibility of growth beyond it. 3 months after my father first arrived at my apartment, much had changed. His health had stabilized, though he would need dialysis indefinitely. He had found a small one-bedroom apartment he could afford on his restructured pension close enough to the dialysis center to access it independently. We had established a new cautious relationship, not the uncomplicated closeness of my childhood, but something hard-earned and authentic. The morning he was preparing to move to his new place, I found him sitting on the edge of the guest bed, holding the photo album we had rescued from his former home. "Everything packed?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up, a small smile crossing his face. "Just about. I was taking one last look." He turned the album so I could see a family photo from a beach vacation when I was around 10. We were happy then, were we not? It was not all bad. I moved into the room and sat beside him. No, it was not all bad. There were a lot of good years. We sat together turning pages, the visual record of a family that had once been whole and then shattered. It struck me that my father had kept this album through the years of estrangement, these tangible memories of happier times. "I want you to know," he said, closing the album carefully, "that these past months with you have been a gift I never expected and certainly did not deserve. Regardless of what happens next, I will always be grateful for this chance." "I am not sorry I helped you," I said honestly, though I never would have predicted it. He smiled ruefully. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. If someone had told me the night of that reunion that in a few months I would be living with you dependent on your care and kindness, you would have said you would rather eat garbage," I suggested, surprised to find I could now reference his cruel words without the sharp pain they had once caused. He winced, but nodded. "I deserved that. The strange thing is," I continued, "helping you has helped me too. For years I was waiting for acknowledgement, for an apology, for some recognition of what happened between us. I thought I needed that to move on. But what I actually needed was to stop waiting for you to give me closure and create it for myself. By helping the person who hurt you," he observed softly. "By remembering who I wanted to be regardless of how others treated me," I corrected gently. "When you called from the hospital that night, I had a choice. I could respond with the same cruelty you had shown me, or I could be the person I aspired to be, someone who does not abandon family in crisis, even when it is difficult." My father nodded slowly, understanding. "You are so much stronger than I ever was." "I do not know about that," I said. "But I do know that helping you freed me from something. I am not waiting anymore for the perfect reconciliation or the perfect apology. I am just living my life, and you are a part of it now in this new way." We finished packing his belongings into my car, the accumulated possessions of his 3-month stay fitting easily into a few bags and boxes. As I drove him to his new apartment, there was a comfortable silence between us, the awkwardness of those early weeks replaced by a measured familiarity. His new place was small but clean and bright, a second-floor unit in a modest complex with an elevator for days when his energy was low. I helped him carry his things inside and arrange the basic furniture he had purchased, setting up his medications on the kitchen counter and programming the dialysis center's number into the new phone I had helped him get. "Will you stay for lunch?" he asked as we finished the last of the unpacking. "I can order something delivered." "I would like that," I said, realizing I meant it. Over sandwiches from a nearby deli, we talked about practical matters. His upcoming medical appointments, the bus route to the dialysis center, a backup plan for days when he might be too weak to travel alone. "I have been thinking," I said carefully, "that I could come by for dinner once a week. Check in, bring groceries if you need them." The offer hung between us, significant in its normality, the kind of regular contact that defined ongoing family relationships rather than emergency arrangements. "I would like that very much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Though you do not have to." "I know I do not have to," I assured him. "That is the point. This is a choice." As I prepared to leave, he walked me to the door, moving more steadily than he had in months, though still with the care of someone aware of their physical limitations. "Autumn," he said, hesitating. "There is something else I wanted to say." I waited, sensing the importance of whatever was coming. "When your mother was dying," he began, his voice soft but steady, She made me promise to take care of you, to make sure you always knew how proud she was of you, how much she loved you. It was the last thing she asked of me, and I failed her. Failed you both." Tears pricked at my eyes at the mention of my mother at this new piece of information about her final days. "But seeing the woman you have become," he continued, "successful in your career, compassionate even to those who do not deserve it, strong in ways I never taught you to be, I know she would be so proud. I certainly am. And I wanted you to know that even though I have no right to claim any credit for the remarkable person you are." The words touched something deep within me, a longing for parental approval I had thought I had outgrown. Not because I needed his validation to know my worth, but because it represented a recognition of the journey I had taken, the person I had fought to become despite the obstacles. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. Driving home to my apartment, now empty of my father's presence, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of unresolved hurt of waiting for a reconciliation that might never come had been replaced by something more complex, but ultimately more freeing, an acceptance of our imperfect history and the possibility of a different future. The healing was not complete, might never be in the sense of returning to what once was. But in helping my father through his darkest time, I had found my own path to peace, not by forgetting or minimizing the hurt he had caused, but by choosing compassion over resentment, action over passivity. Over the following weeks and months, our new arrangement found its rhythm. I visited his apartment regularly, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes just checking in. He kept his medical appointments faithfully, gradually regaining strength while accepting the permanent limitations of his condition. We developed a careful friendship built on the ruins of our former relationship, but with stronger foundations of honesty and mutual respect. Sometimes when we shared a meal or watched a movie together, glimpses of our old connection would surface unexpectedly, a shared joke or reference that belonged to our happier past. These moments no longer brought pain, but instead a bittersweet recognition of all that had been lost and what might, in a different form, be reclaimed. My father continued to make amends in small, consistent ways, not just to me, but to the extended family he had pushed away during his years with Diane. He attended family gatherings when his health permitted, humble and grateful for each inclusion. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions about lives he had missed, knowing built bridges with patient persistence. For my part, I found that helping my father had healed something in me as well. The act of extending compassion to someone who had hurt me deeply had broken a cycle of pain I had not realized I was trapped in. Not because he deserved my help, but because offering it had freed me from the prison of waiting for justice or perfect resolution. 6 months after that devastating family reunion, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment to celebrate my 35th birthday. Friends from work mingled with Jessica and other close friends. Taylor and a few cousins represented family. And there was my father moving carefully among my guests, a bit apart, but present, watching me with quiet pride as I blew out candles on a cake Jessica had baked. Later, as the party wound down, he handed me a small wrapped package. "It is not much," he said almost apologetically. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. I recognized it immediately, a piece my mother had worn often. "It was your mother's," he confirmed. "One of the few things I managed to keep safe over the years. She would want you to have it now." As I fastened it around my wrist, the cool silver a tangible connection to the mother I had lost so young, I realized that some wounds might never completely heal, but they could become part of a larger story of resilience and growth. The public humiliation of that family reunion had led through an unlikely path of crisis and caregiving to a kind of peace I had stopped believing was possible. "Thank you." I said the words encompassing far more than just the gift. My father nodded, understanding the broader meaning. "No, Autumn. Thank you for showing me that sometimes when we least deserve kindness, receiving it can transform us. That is the lesson I will carry with me for whatever time I have left." Have you ever had to help someone who hurt you deeply? I never imagined that my father's cruel public rejection would lead to a role reversal where he would need my help to survive. But I learned that sometimes helping others can be the key to our own healing. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between resentment and compassion? like, and subscribe. If this story resonated with you, and remember that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is break the cycle of hurt, not for others, but for ourselves. Thank you for listening to my story.